Is it recording?
Yes.
Good.
Thank you. Okay, so you're starting conservation programs. Is there an official department when you are advancing the NEPCOP?
I was the conservation department, and then I had one other person came on to help with the records and the surveys and that sort of thing, keep all the records of that, and organize things. And after that, it grew into, when we started the Plant Conservation Volunteer Program, we hired somebody who was in charge of the Plant Conservation Volunteers. And then we started having somebody look at sanctuaries and maintenance and that sort of thing, and other people keeping track of seed banks. So that's how it started. We just sort of grew as our needs were in terms of personnel.
So you must have been proverbially like the one-armed paper hanger running around all over the region, or how did that work?
Yeah, well, I mean, we were, what NEPCOP really is about is organizing people. So you don't have to run we don't have to run all over the region yourself, although I certainly did plenty of that over the years, but you really need to figure out how to schedule people to do things, make sure that it's organized, make sure that they have the materials to do it, make sure that they have permissions, make sure we have all the permits, all that stuff that's needed for people. But that's what we're really about, is helping plant conservation by organizing people who are volunteering to do these things for us. That's how it works.
And just get that. That's good. So when did you have more people working here on staff? Tell us about that transition.
I was trying to think of I mean, it just sort of grew organically over time. I couldn't tell you exactly the years when people came. I think it might have been somewhere in 92 or 93 when a second person joined me, and after that it just sort of grew, as we went along. Probably we didn't have somebody working on dedicated to the seed bank and the NEPCOP administration totally. And it's hard to say. I would say back in around 2000 or so, we started having somebody in those positions. So it was 10 years after that.
Mm-hmm.
So the first 10 years we were kind of on our own, two of us, and then after that it sort of grew.
And so as soon as you stepped into the role of conservation from propagation, you were focused on endangered plants through these programs. Did that make sense within the organization? Did you have to fight for that?
No, I think what we were really looking for is what was the Wildflower Society's niche in conservation, and it really made sense since we had this horticultural background and this seed banking background. And you also have to remember one other thing: the Center for Plant Conservation, a national organization, was starting about that time. It was actually starting in 1982 when I got here. I got here in 1980, but in 1982 they started. So we were actually holding the 501c3 certificate for the CPC for a while it was stationed here in Boston before it moved to St. Louis, and then now it's in San Diego. But so we were always part of that sort of organization at the same time. We were one of the founding organizations of that. So we had pretty good basis in conservation even at that time. Even in 82, before we started our own conservation program, I was collecting seeds for the national collection of the CPC as part of that before we started the conservation program in 1990. So we had a really good basis in this. And things just grew from there. We were trying to figure out, the endangered species part of it. Nobody was really handling that part of it the way we approached it. And it made sense for the society based on our horticultural and conservation bent.
Have you ever seen any conflict with the two-pronged mission of the society?
Not really. Horticulture can be, horticulture of rare plants is always sort of a controversial thing in the trade, at least among people who deal with endangered species, for fear that they're going to either collect seeds from wild populations and damage the populations, or introduce populations in the wild that we don't know about or could possibly affect wild populations. So there is that play in there. But in general, I think everybody understands that there's a role of horticulture, at least certainly in seed banking, as a backup to catastrophe in the wild. And if you don't have that, you may lose some populations over time that you might want to have had. You may lose some genetic information there. So our goal is really, we want to collect now the genetic variation that we find in New England's rare species. We want to do that as soon as possible, because populations are going to go by the wayside, whether we like it or not.
Have you seen that happen?
We've watched populations go downhill, and you don't have, in some cases, you don't have the manpower and you don't have the money to do anything about it. In some cases, you don't know what to do about it, you know, what's causing this. But what you know is that over time, some of these populations which reach really small numbers are how much time are you going to dedicate to those versus the populations that are large populations, which are more likely to survive. It's a question of triage in terms of how you look at that then.
Mm-hmm. And does it depend on the species that's going away or just
Sure.
the basic numbers?
I mean, we look at both globally rare species that occur in New England, of which there are about 62 species, 64 now, I think. And there are about 360-something species that we consider regionally rare. Well, that means that they're rare in New England. It doesn't mean that they're rare everywhere, whereas globally rare species are rare everywhere they are. And New England may have the lion's share of those populations in some cases. We would certainly be more concerned about those than we would necessarily about the regionally rare species, but we try to save them. We try to make sure we're covering them all. We probably have 250 species in our seed bank right now, populations from about 250 species in our seed bank. The total is 388, but we probably need, some of those are ferns and orchids, which the seed banking protocols are sort of in flux right now, and we're going to have to add cryopreservation techniques in order to preserve some of those, which I hope to do, well, somebody's going to do in the future. And those are the sorts of things that you need to take into account as you go forward. But we've got a pretty good percentage of the plants that we can seed bank now. Not satisfied yet. We need to make sure now that we're covering all the populations, as many populations as we think we need to cover the genetic diversity of each of those plants.
Wow. Can you quantify it?
There are some protocols. The Center for Plant Conservation over the years has been modifying their protocols, and there's some protocols. They're generally saying you need, on a globally rare basis, they're recommending 5 occurrences, 5 populations, in order to capture the genetic diversity. And within that, there's certain protocols for how you collect seed and the number of individuals you need to collect from. But obviously, if we have the lion's share of some of the globally rare species, we're going to be collecting more from more populations of that. The only way there's no way we can quantify whether we have captured that genetic diversity for every population without doing all the genetics of all the plant populations, and I don't see anybody stepping forward to do that at this particular time.
Isn't that what you're going to do after you retire?
No.
Everyone thinks you're going to do that.
No, I'm not.
I'm going to stop again just for a quick light adjustment.